Good morning and welcome to day 13 of our series. Today's topic is social psychology, which is the scientific study of how other people's thoughts and behavior will affect us and how our own thoughts and feelings affect our behavior toward other people. Something I've not really said throughout this series, but it's worth considering, is that the Bible is the best psychology textbook that's ever been written. Within the pages of the Bible, we are commanded to do good, to share the things we have, and to treat other people the same way we want to be treated. Just those three things right there is a pretty comprehensive way of how we should act in a social world. It is the most authoritative book on the subject of human behavior. The Bible provides a conceptually comprehensive analysis of the human condition. It talks about important concepts such as what it's like to be a person, the problems we have in daily living, and the procedures and mechanisms of change or transformation. Social psychology studies how thoughts and feelings and actions are influenced by other people and vice versa. So it's a science of people. And interestingly, other people don't have to be present to exert influence on us. And outward social behavior and inner mental life need to be in concert with one another. We don't like it when we act in a different way than what we think. I'll be talking more about that in just a minute. We all live in a social world. We're all affected by culture, environment, and the people and objects that we find in them. Our individual social world helps to create a personal world that has two important key components. The first is our self concept. These are the thoughts, feelings, and beliefs that we hold about who we are and what characterizes us. The second is self esteem. Self esteem is the judgment that we make about our value as human beings. I personally am on a one man crusade against self esteem. I much prefer the concept of self respect. Self esteem implies that I exist, therefore I deserve. Self-esteem on the other, self-respect on the other hand, is the idea is I have accomplished something. And because I've accomplished something, I now feel good about myself rather than I exist so I feel good about me. That's self-esteem. Now, you're not going to find very many psychologists who believe the same as I do, but that's how I look at it. Other people do indeed affect how we interpret events. That's because behavior occurs in a social context. Let me give you an example. Typically, when people look up and to the right, they are lying or tapping into their imagination. However, when someone looks up and to the left, they are remembering or trying to recall something. They are tapping into their memory. Happens in a social setting. Other people will affect how we feel about ourselves. This is called social comparison. When we compare ourselves to somebody we believe is higher on the social strata than we are, it's one of two things. We are aspirational in saying, I want to be like whoever it is we want to be like, and I know I need to practice or I have to do this or I have to do that in order to be on the same level. Or it's because we feel bad because I'm not as good as that person. When we compare ourselves to somebody lower on the social strata than we believe that we do that in order to feel better about ourselves. Well, I may not be all I can be, but at least I'm not like him, whoever him may be. Other people also affect our behavior, mostly through social norms. Norms are learned socially based rules that will prescribe what people should do and should not do in different social situations. Now, the thing is, norms are not universal, nor are they unchanging. Some commonly accepted social norms examples would be holding the door open for others. We speak quietly in public places. I think we're losing that one when people put their phone on speaker and they're yelling into their phone. Uh, Waiting politely in line, waiting our turn. Respecting personal space. This gets kind of interesting because personal space is different throughout the world. In the United States, it's just about 3 feet, just about arm's distance. We're comfortable when we're about arm's length away from somebody. In the East, for example, it's a little closer than that. It's about 18 inches. This can sometimes cause uncomfortable situations. You have somebody from the East moving in, trying to get into that 18-inch space, whereas the American keeps backing up, trying to maintain that arm's length distance. So you need to be aware of what's going on. Uh, Something else that we have to deal with is called the reciprocity norm. This is the tendency to respond to other people as they have acted toward you. And this is particularly true when we first meet somebody. When we don't know someone and we don't know how they're going to act, we're very careful about what we reveal to each other. So it starts out something simple. Uh, my name is David, and I was born in Biloxi, Mississippi, which indeed I was. We expect the other person now to say, well, my name is whatever it is, and I was born wherever it was they were born. And then we begin to be very careful about the steps that we take. We reveal little bits at a time. We don't jump in and reveal deep, dark secrets about ourselves. As a matter of fact, when that happens, we tend to be very uncomfortable. My wife and I can recall a time, oh my goodness, 30 years ago, I guess, where um, we got together at a social gathering, and there was this one woman there, and she told her life story. She dominated the conversation, and people were trying to get out of there because we really didn't want to hear about the last operation that you had. She was just revealing too much too fast, and we tend not to like that. The presence of other people can change how we act in a given situation. Typically, the more people that are around, the higher the stress level that we feel. This is particularly true when it's a performance-based situation. If you have to sing, or if you're in an athletic event, or even if you're ministering, the greater the number of people that are there, the higher level of stress you're likely to feel. Uh, Now, it can be overcome, but still, more people, more stress. Now, something else that happens that's really a unique situation is something we call de-individuation. This is a state where somebody becomes submerged within the group and they lose their sense of individuality. De-individuation comes about when the individual feels like they can't be held personally responsible for what they're doing because they can't be easily identified, and their attention shifts away from their own internal thoughts and standards and toward the immediate stimuli of what's going on at at the time. An example is rioting. Not too many of us would walk down a street and pick up a brick and throw it through a window and take whatever it is we wanted. However, how many times have we heard stories about riots where entire neighborhoods were burned down or entire blocks of stores were looted and robbed? Well, that's de-individuation in action. Most of us wouldn't do that, but given the right circumstances, we lose ourselves in the crowd. Social influence, the Bible has a lot to say about it. Proverbs 27 and 17, very familiar scripture. Most of us can commit this to memory. As iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. So we have good social interactions and influence. So, you can, through discussion and interaction, you can sharpen me and I can sharpen you. But the Bible also says this. Proverbs 22, 24, and 25 says, "Do not make friends with a hot-tempered man. Do not associate with one easily angered, or you may learn his ways and get yourself ensnared." There's one that we really need to pay attention to. Most of us don't like to be around people that are easily angered. We don't like angry confrontations, but we can very easily be caught up in a situation. Social expectations are things that are often met not because they're true, but because we look for information that will confirm our point of view. And the expectations we have will influence how others behave around us. Um, if we expect children to misbehave, typically they will. If, on the other hand, we expect children to behave at the level they're able to, we can't expect a 3-year-old to act like they're 16. But if we expect children to behave, then they probably will too. If we expect somebody who doesn't look like us to be a shiftless and lazy person and we treat them that way, chances are they'll act that way. If, on the other hand, we treat people as uplifting human beings, they tend to perform that way. Social perceptions are the processes through which we interpret information about other people, we form impressions of other people, and we draw conclusions about the reasons of their behavior. We can see this in compliance and conformity. Compliance is when a person will adjust their behavior because of a request. We frequently see requests for compliance from politicians and sales agents and things like that. There are some pretty vivid examples, such as the foot in the door. This is when somebody gains your compliance by starting out with a small request and then they follow up with something larger. Here in Virginia is political season and we have elections coming up before too long. So you might have a politician come up to you and say, "You know what, the last time I ran for office, you put a bumper sticker on your car. Would you be willing to put a yard sign in your yard?" You see, you said yes to a small request, so now they're coming back for a bigger request. The door in the face is a really interesting technique that's used. This is when somebody asks for a ridiculous thing, and then when that is denied, they're followed up by a smaller request. A good example would be a young man who goes to his dad and says, "Hey, Dad, can I drive your new Mercedes for my date with Sally this Friday night?" Well, what's Dad going to say? "Of course not. No, you can't drive my new Mercedes. No." So the young man comes back with this. "Okay, Dad, well, how about $20 for gas?" See, he knew his dad wasn't going to let him drive the Mercedes, but maybe he'll let him have the $20. So those are just two examples of what compliance is. Conformity, on the other hand, is when a person will change their behavior or beliefs to match those of other people within the group. Conformity occurs as a result of unspoken group pressure, whether it's real or imagined. We think people expect this out of us, so that's what we do. But the Bible warns us about this in Romans 12:2. It says, "And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." This leads us to obedience. Obedience is a change in behavior that comes in response to a demand from an authority figure. So here, particularly those of us who have been in the military service, when we have been ordered to do something, we have been told, this is what you will do. We're very familiar with having to do what we were told to do, whether or not it was something we enjoyed doing or even wanted to do. But the Bible tells us about this too. 1 Peter 1:14 and 15 says this, "As obedient children, not conforming yourselves to the former lust as in your ignorance, but as he who called you is holy, you also be holy in all your conduct." So if somebody's telling you to do something that you know is wrong, don't do it. Don't do it. Social psychology talks about first impressions. This happens through person perception. This is the process by which we form impressions of and make judgments about the traits and characteristics of other people. There's a phenomenon that's called "what is beautiful is good." And what that means is physical attractiveness will play a major role in forming first impressions. Universally, physical attractiveness is associated with being more responsive, interesting, sociable, intelligent, kind, outgoing, and attractive people tend to be recommended for promotions more so than people who are not quite as attractive. The Bible tells us about this as well. In 1 Samuel 16:7, we read, "But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or at his physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." And we all probably know that this was the time when Samuel was supposed to anoint a king from the household of Jesse. And David was out in the fields watching the sheep. And Jesse, David's own dad, didn't think that David had what it took to be a king. What must that be like? Even your dad doesn't think you have what it takes. But you see, the big, strapping, attractive older brothers, God had refused them. It didn't matter what they looked like. God was looking at the heart of David. Attribution is the process that we go through to explain the causes of behavior. Attributions are important because they help us to understand somebody's behavior. It helps us to predict somebody's behavior in the future if the situation is similar. And it helps us to control a situation if it should occur again. We don't like uncontrollability. We don't like people that we can't predict what they're going to do. If you don't know when you see me if I'm going to be all friendly and, "Hey, how you doing?" or if I'm going to blow up and call you every name in the world except a Christian, I'm not a real likable fellow if that's the way I am. So we don't like chaos. We like predictability, and we like things to be in control. We also use attributions to explain the causes of behavior, even our own. There's two main ways that we do this. The first is an internal attribution. This explains behavior as being due to the characteristic of the person. Well, they did that because that's just the way they are. It was internal to the individual. An external attribution explains behavior as arising from the situation. Oh, they wouldn't normally do that. That was a really unusual circumstances. You see, it was outside of that person. So attributions are really important when we look at other people's behavior and even our own behavior. Which leads us to cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the uneasiness, that weird feeling we get when our thoughts and beliefs and our attitudes are inconsistent with our action, our behavior. And that weird feeling that we get, in theory, motivates us to try to restore consistency between our thoughts and our actions. You see, everybody prefers thoughts, including their own thoughts and behavior, to agree with each other. Inconsistent or dissonant thoughts make us feel uneasy. It motivates us to make our thoughts more consistent with our action. This attitude behavior inconsistency causes discomfort because it injures our self-concept. You'll remember I spoke about self-concept when we first started talking this morning. In an individualistic culture such as we have in the United States, behaving in ways that are contradictory to our personal beliefs will create dissonance, and it may even motivate us to change our attitudes to fit our past behavior. Now, all of this brings us to this. Christians are social creatures. Hebrews 10:24 and 25 says this, "And let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works." Sounds like sociability to me. Verse 25, "Not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as is the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. We are made to be together in groups," whether it's 2 or 3 people or whether it's 300 in a church setting. We are made to be in groups. Jesus interacted with people at all levels of society. He ate dinner with the Pharisees and with publicans with impartial sociability. It didn't matter to him who you were. He was willing to meet with you. He didn't refuse invitations to socialize regardless of where they came from. Matter of fact, Jesus was so socially active that the Pharisees complained about this. We can see this in Matthew 11:19, where the Bible tells us, "The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, 'Look, a glutton and a winebibber, a friend of tax collectors and sinners, but wisdom is justified by her children.'" Now, that statement was untrue, but it points to a basic truth. Jesus was not averse to social gatherings. He frequented the society of men in order to diffuse or to spread his influence and doctrine, and so that men would see and hear and know him, and through him the grace of God. Jesus enjoyed a good party. In his provision of wine for the wedding feast at Canaan, we observe that Jesus did 2 things. Before I get to that, this is the first recorded miracle of Jesus. Now, I personally don't believe that this is the first miracle that Jesus ever performed. Stop and think about this. Jesus lived at a time where medicine was rudimentary at best, and there may or may not have been a physician that you could call upon. And even if there was, the physician may not have known any more than anybody else about what was wrong. And Jesus lived in a house of a carpenter, all kind of sharp instruments laying about. It's hard for me to imagine that Jesus, being the older brother of a family of several children and being God in flesh, that if his little sister was sick, that he wouldn't heal her? Jesus loved his family. Can you imagine James as a 12 or 13-year-old boy roughhousing and falling down and breaking his arm? Would Jesus refuse to heal his brother's arm? Now, we don't know that any of those things happened, but it's easy to conceive of. So, I don't know what Jesus' first miracle was, but I do know that this is the first recorded miracle. Now, if you disagree with me, that's fine. It doesn't hurt my feelings and it doesn't affect our salvation, but it's just something to consider. So, what Jesus did, the two things that he did is first, he gave his friends what was not absolutely necessary, but he gave them something luxurious. It was something that they did not expect. Even the president of the feast said this, normally you provide the wine, the good wine first, and then when everybody's had as much wine as they want, then you bring out the bad stuff. You've done the absolute backward thing here. You gave us the best wine last. Nobody does that. Well, you see, Jesus provided this wine, and Jesus is perfection himself, so why would we expect anything less than that from the gifts that he gives? The guests there at the wedding could have just had water. But Jesus didn't choose that would be the way that it would be. He gives us better gifts than what we deserve, even better than what we desire. And he did this, number 2. He gave his friends from abundance, more than enough for the occasion. There was a supply for future needs. So it's through that type of action that he revealed the liberality of his heart and how much he cares for other people and how he provides for us. Now, I'm drawing to a close here, just a few minutes, but all this social interaction that we're talking about is the work for every individual Christian. It's not a corporate thing. Now, we may socialize corporately, but the Bible tells us to be social as individuals. Galatians 5:14 tells us this. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Matthew 7:12 says this. Therefore, whatever you want men to do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. That's frequently called the golden rule. Galatians 6:10 tells us, therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith. Not only are we supposed to be good to everybody, we're supposed to be particularly good to people that are of our same holy faith. Now, just for a minute, I want to look at 2 misconceptions that are generally held about the social life of a Christian. The first is that it's no fun. For some reason, people believe that when you become a Christian, you stop doing things that are fun to do, that there are rules and regulations to follow, and other people are watching you. The other thing is daily church attendance. Most people think it's a must for Christians to attend church a couple of times a week. They assume that the more a person goes to church, the better Christian he or she is. Now, there may be a little bit of truth in that, but it is not true, and it doesn't reflect what it means to be a Christian. The risk of having that point of view leads to stereotyping, which simply isn't true. I'll be talking about stereotyping on Monday, so be sure to tune in for that. Acts 2:46 through 47 tells us this. So continuing daily with one accord in the temple and breaking bread from house to house, they ate their food with gladness and simplicity of heart, praising God and having favor with all the people, and the Lord added to the church daily those who were being saved. When we look at the New Testament model of Christianity, it includes spending time with people outside the 4 walls of the church. It's not the work of the church, it is the individual Christians that are socializing together. So, how do you be a Christian in a social world? Well, let me give you some tips here. When you are born again and you choose to follow Jesus Christ, certain things will change. One of them is the activities that you will undertake, as well as the kind of friendships that you have. Apart from the social and emotional, psychological, and mental shifts in a Christian's lifestyle, other things will remain the same. For example, you still need to go to work. There's a recent Pew Research Center study of the way that religion influences the daily lives of Americans, and the results tell us that people who are highly religious are more engaged with their extended families, they're more likely to volunteer, they are more involved in their communities, and they are generally happier with the way things are going in their lives. People who believe that behaving in a particular way or performing certain actions, these are key elements of their faith, and they are much more likely to say that they actually perform those actions on a regular basis. Matthew 22:37 through 40 tells us this. Jesus said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." We are to love one another. That's social. That's psychology. Romans 12 verses 1 and 2 says this. "I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." To summarize all that we've gone over today, I will say this. The Bible has a lot more concept that resembles modern psychology. For example, mindfulness and value-driven actions. There's a lot about psychology, in particular social psychology, to be found within the covers of your Bible. It's really interesting to me to see that a book written thousands of years ago will mention concepts that are now regularly practiced and promoted by modern psychologists and scientists. There's nothing new under the sun, Solomon said. With that, I wish you a good day. May the peace of the Lord God be with you. Be of good cheer. Have a great day, and I'll see you again tomorrow.